At Fort Benson, a sun-scorched military post near Apache lands, Lady Arabella Worthington stood still, sweat soaking through her heavy dress. Her corset bit into her sides, and though tears burned in her eyes, she held them back. She wouldn't give her father the satisfaction. "This is your punishment," Lord Worthington declared, his voice echoing through the dusty courtyard. Soldiers and traitors paused to watch. "Your greed and defiance have brought disgrace to our name." But before we dive into what happens next, I'd love to know, where are you tuning in from today? Drop a comment below, and please like the video. Thank you. Arabella's face flushed. At 23, she had failed to marry, no matter how hard her father had tried to find her a husband. Her weight, always a source of shame in his eyes, reminded him too much of her late mother. Turning to the silent Apache man beside him, Lord Worthington continued, "Chief Maka, as agreed, I give you my daughter to settle our land dispute." "As agreed, I give you my daughter to settle our land dispute," Lord Worthington said coldly. "She will serve your people however you choose." Arabella's head jerked up in shock. "Father, please, enough," he snapped, not looking at her. "You've had your chance. Now you'll face the cost of failure." The Apache man, tall and still, studied her with eyes she couldn't read. Unlike her father, there was no hatred or pride in his expression, just quiet acceptance. He gave a single nod. "She's yours now," her father said, turning on his heel. "Do whatever you want with her." He mounted his horse and rode away without another glance. Arabella felt the ground shift beneath her. She had been cast aside, left in a foreign place, handed over to a man her people called savage, simply because she didn't meet her father's expectations. The Apache stepped toward her slowly. She winced as he reached out, but he only picked up her small bag of belongings. Then, with a simple hand gesture, he motioned for her to follow. They walked away from the fort, the hot wind stirring the dust behind them. Arabella looked back once. Her father was gone, and so was the life she'd always known. For days they crossed endless land, dry, open, and unforgiving. Her feet blistered inside her too tight shoes, and even with a shawl over her head, the sun burned her skin. Her throat ached constantly from thirst. She expected him to be harsh, like her father had warned. But Maka said little. When she slowed, he waited. When she tripped, he paused. At night, he built a fire and quietly handed her water and simple food, dried meat and berries that he didn't speak much. He didn't scold. He didn't comfort. He simply was steady and silent, like the desert around them. On the second day, Arabella found her voice. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, her throat dry from silence. Maka pointed to a line of distant mountains. "Home," he said. It was the first word he'd spoken to her. That night, the air turned icy. Without a word, he handed her an extra blanket. It was a small act, but it caught her off guard. All her life, she'd been taught that Apache men were cruel and wild. Yet this one showed more quiet kindness than her own father ever had. Later, as they sat by the fire, she asked, "Why did you take me? You must know I'm a burden." Maka looked at her across the flames, then spoke calmly. "The white man doesn't know true worth." Then he went back to sharpening his knife. She watched him, puzzled but curious. His hands moved with care, each motion sure and steady. There was something grounded and graceful in the way he carried himself. Rooted in the land around them, that be why the fifth day, her body had started to adjust. Her steps no longer felt so heavy, and her breath didn't come in gasps. She noticed how Maka moved through the wild with ease, finding water where she saw only dust, noticing animals she couldn't see. One afternoon, she spotted a plant he had taught her to recognize. When she pointed it out, the edge of his mouth tugged slightly. Not quite a smile, but something close. For the first time, she felt proud. That night, under a blanket of stars, she realized something had changed. Maka was no longer just a man she was handed to. He had become her guide, her anchor in a world she was still learning to survive in. Suddenly, the village appeared, a quiet cluster of shelters hidden between red cliffs. As they walked in, children stopped to stare. Women lifted their heads from their work. Their faces showed curiosity, not cruelty. Arabella pulled her worn shawl tightly around herself, suddenly very aware of her messy hair, her travel-worn clothes, and her size. "Come," Maka said, leading her toward a small hut made from wood and animal skins. An old woman stepped out to meet them. Her face was deeply lined, her eyes sharp and quick. She spoke to Maka in their native tongue, her voice fast but calm. Maka answered the elder woman with calm, brief words, sometimes motioning toward Arabella. "This is Nayli," he told Arabella. "My grandmother. You'll stay with her." Before she could say anything, he turned and walked away, leaving her in the care of the old woman. Nayli gestured for her to come inside. The shelter was cooler than she expected and tidy. Woven mats lined the floor, and handmade tools and containers were neatly placed around the space. Nayli pointed to a sleeping mat in the corner, then to a clay pot filled with water. The message was clear. This was her place now, and she was welcome to rest and clean up. That evening, Arabella sat in the doorway, quietly watching village life unfold. Children did their chores without complaining. Women worked side by side, grinding corn and cooking with steady hands. The men returned from a hunt and divided their catch among the families. It was nothing like her father had described. There was no chaos, no violence, just people living together, helping one another. Nayli handed her a bowl of warm stew. Arabella took it gratefully, murmuring, "Thank you." Nayli didn't speak English, but she seemed to understand. She gently patted Arabella's hand, then returned to her meal. Later that night, Arabella spotted Maka sitting with the elders around a fire. In the glow of the flames, surrounded by his people, he no longer looked like the quiet, distant man who had led her through the desert. Here, he seemed at home, respected and at peace. Here, Maka wasn't just a guide. He was valued, trusted, and at ease. And for the first time since her father cast her away, Arabella felt a small spark of hope. Maybe what had started as punishment could turn into something entirely different. As the days passed, Arabella did her best to fit in, though it wasn't easy. Her soft hands blistered quickly, and her clumsy attempts at daily tasks, grinding corn, weaving, or cooking, usually ended in frustration. The women didn't mock her, but their quiet looks said enough. She was struggling. One morning, Nayli gave her a clay pot and pointed toward the nearby stream. Arabella understood. Go fetch water. It sounded simple, but once filled, the pot was heavy, and halfway back, her arms gave out. The pot crashed to the ground and shattered. She stared at the broken pieces, tears rising to her eyes. She couldn't even manage this. As she knelt to pick up the shards, she cut her finger. A shadow fell over her. She looked up and saw Maka. He didn't scold her or look disappointed. Instead, he crouched beside her and gently took her hand. From a small pouch, he pulled out a leaf, crushed it between his fingers, and pressed it to the cut. The bleeding stopped quickly. "Leave it," he said, nodding toward the broken pot. Then he handed her a smaller water container. "Start with what you can carry." His words hit her harder than any lecture. He wasn't giving up on her. He was teaching her how to grow, step by step. That evening, as she helped Nayli prepare dinner, Arabella noticed Maka watching her from across the fire. When their eyes met, he didn't look away. He gave a small nod, quiet, but full of meaning. The next morning, he arrived at Nayli's home with a bundle of plants in his arms. Using simple words and hand gestures, Maka began teaching Arabella about the plants around them, what could heal, what was safe to eat, and what could harm. His calm patience surprised her, even when she mixed up leaves or forgot names. He never grew upset. One day, she finally asked, "Why are you helping me?" Maka paused before answering. "You're not who your father thinks you are," he said, "and you're not who you think you are either." His words echoed her mind long after he walked away. For the first time, someone saw more than her size, more than her mistakes. He saw potential. The weeks turned into months. The summer heat softened into cool autumn evenings. Arabella's hands toughened. Her skin darkened under the sun, and the small water jug she once struggled with was replaced by a larger one she could now carry with ease. The village women stopped seeing her as an outsider. They invited her in, taught her their language, and showed her how to live their way. One cool evening, under the bright harvest moon, Maka came to her as she sat outside Nayli's home, weaving a basket. "Come," he said gently. She followed him without question, curious. They walked a narrow trail through the cliffs, climbing quietly until they reached a wide ledge. Below, the village lights flickered like tiny stars on the ground. Maka sat on a rock and patted the spot beside him. Then, from a small pouch, he pulled out a wooden flute. "My father made this," he said, running his fingers over its carved surface. "He taught me that music can speak when words fall short." He lifted the flute to his lips and began to play. The sound was soft, soulful, full of longing and quiet beauty, like the desert itself. Arabella closed her eyes, letting the melody carry her. When it ended, she looked at Maka, who was already watching her closely. "That was beautiful," she whispered. "So are you," he replied, his voice calm and certain. Arabella froze. No one had ever called her that. She had always been too much, always the disappointment. But in Maka's eyes, there was no judgment, only honesty. "Your father only saw what you lacked," Maka said softly. "He never noticed your strength, your kindness, or how sharp your mind is." He nodded toward the village lights below. "But my people see it. I see it." Arabella's eyes filled with tears. "Back home, I was nothing," she whispered. "A disappointment." "Here," Maka replied gently. "You're becoming who you truly are." He paused, then slowly reached for her hand. "That's why I accepted you that day. Not as a punishment, but as a beginning. Under the endless desert sky, with the village glowing warmly beneath them, something passed between them, something deep and unspoken, a shared understanding that rose beyond how their story had started." Later, as Maka quietly walked her back to Nayli's home, Arabella understood. The moment that once felt like her greatest shame had become the first step toward freedom. As Arabella stepped into Nayli's dwelling, the firelight flickering gently against the walls, she paused and looked back at Maka one last time. He stood still beneath the stars, calm and unwavering, just as he had been from the start. She smiled softly. What had begun as rejection had become a rebirth. In losing everything her old world demanded of her, she had uncovered something far more precious. Her worth, her voice, and a love that saw her. Not for what she should be, but for who she truly was. She was no longer the unwanted daughter. She was home.